Ecco. Quindi vi do il benvenuto all'Istituto Superiore di Sanità, che è la nostra casa. Io mi chiamo Angela Giusti, sono ricercatrice al Centro Nazionale per la Prevenzione delle Malattie e la Promozione della Salute e mi occupo da, non so, ormai una trentina d'anni forse, dei temi dell'alimentazione infantile, dell'allattamento e dei primi 1000 giorni, la promozione della salute nei primi 1000 giorni. Abbiamo pensato di fare la prima introduzione sia in italiano che in inglese, dopodiché la giornata sarà la prima sessione completamente in inglese, la seconda completamente in italiano. So, thank you to everyone. Thank you, good morning, sorry for to everyone. Thank you for being here. And my name is Angela Giusti. I'm a researcher at the National Institute of Health. And welcome to our home. This is the Italian National Institute of Health. Welcome also for people that are connected online. And yeah, this day will be divided in two parts. One will be held in English and the second one in Italian. So we hope you will enjoy the event. And if you have any question, you will find, for people online, you will find the question and answer section, so you can post your questions. I give the floor to my colleague Paola Nardone.
Buongiorno a tutti, sono Paola Nardone, sono una ricercatrice al Centro Nazionale di Sorveglianza e Promozione della Salute dell'Istituto Superiore di Sanità e insieme ad Angela Giusti sono codirettrice del Collaborating Center dell'OMS sul sovrappeso e l'obesità nei bambini e nelle bambine. Il Collaborating Center ha l'obiettivo di supportare le politiche dell'OMS nella prevenzione del sovrappeso e dell'obesità e nella promozione della salute nei bambini e nelle bambine, nonché supportare tutti gli aspetti relativi alla formazione e alla promozione dell'allattamento nella regione europea dell'OMS. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. This is, for me, the first face-to-face meeting after COVID pandemic, so I am very excited to see many people. And I'm Paola Nardone, and together with Angela Giusti, we are the directors of the WHO Collaborating Center on Childhood Obesity. The center provides technical support assistance to WHO program to prevention childhood obesity, as well as the training to promote breastfeeding in WHO European regions. So today's conference is a part of the Collaborating Center on Childhood Obesity. And now I give the floor to Elise. Thank you.
Buongiorno, è bellissimo rivedere quest'aula tutta rifatta e piena di persone. Ringrazio ovviamente chi si è collegato anche dall'esterno. Mi chiamo Elise Chapin, sono la Technical Officer del programma Insieme per l'allattamento del Comitato Italiano per l'UNICEF. Abbiamo una collaborazione da anni ormai con l'Istituto Superiore di Sanità e questo evento di oggi è l'ultimo in ordine cronologico delle nostre fatiche insieme, diciamole così. Vi volevo ricordare che se avete delle domande potete porre nello spazio del domande e risposte e così via via li raccoglieremo insieme. Good morning, my name is Elise Chapin. I'm the Technical Officer for the Baby Friendly Initiatives that's run by the Italian National Committee for UNICEF here in Italy. We have a number of collaborations with the Italian National Institute of Health, and this is the latest of our efforts together, and I am really looking forward to the presentations today. If you have any questions, as Angela said before, you can use the Q&A section and type in your question. People who have questions in here can use the microphone. Per chi ha poi le domande da fare, chi è in presenza, ci sono dei microfoni e magari ci organizzeremo alla fine della prima sessione per le domande. Potete fare le domande sia in inglese che in italiano. You can ask your questions in English or in Italian. Don't be shy. And I will, at this point, turn the floor over to Giovanni Capelli, who is the Director of the National Center for Disease Prevention and Health Promotion here at the Italian National Institute of Health.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. And I'm bringing the welcome from the president of the Italian National Institute of Health, Silvio Brusaferro, which at the last minute was not able to attend this morning this meeting, and from me and our center for our National Center for Health Prevention and Promotion of Health. And I have to say that I'm very glad and proud to have the opportunity to host all of you here in our institution, gathering the experience and the views of worldwide experts to discuss a topic which, while it's very relevant also in normal times, acquires further importance in the particular circumstances in which we are living nowadays and in which we lived in the last years and months. In fact, we well know that a condition would bring pressure and possibly disruption of healthcare and health prevention services like natural disasters or epidemics or the pandemic we lived in or the war we are now facing and living in some way in some of our friend countries, always hit especially the weakest groups in a population, like the pregnant women, the infants, the children. And so that brings to us the utmost importance of the topics you will be talking about during this conference. So I'm very happy again. I hope you will have a very good journey through these arguments today, and I hope to see all of you again in other initiatives we will bring together with the collaborative center with our partners, which are together today, like UNICEF and WHO, and obviously our people working in the center on these topics. So thank you very much. I now have to do something I hate. I would have been attending together with you, but unfortunately, we have other things boiling up for other projects, but I swear that Angela will explain to me everything comes out during this day in the next days. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Director. So now we will try to connect with Dr. Branca, who is traveling. Oh, we can see you. Yeah, perfect. Good morning,
Sì,
Dr. Branca.
Buongiorno, grazie per la possibilità di connettermi così virtualmente e io spero che la connessione funzioni. Se non funziona me lo dite, ho registrato il messaggio ieri sera, quindi potete proiettare quello. E proseguirò in inglese, quindi so good morning to all. Thanks for the opportunity to join you virtually. We're living unprecedented crisis times in which the humanitarian emergencies due to climate change are compounded by health crisis and by devastating conflicts. Emergencies are affecting a large proportion of the world's population, but the risk of an emergency touches all. In emergencies, lack of access to nutritious food, disruption of essential nutrition services, limited access to clean water and sanitation, trauma, injury, and displacement all affect the ability of caregivers to meet the nutritional needs of infants and young children. In the global food crisis, for example, poverty is increasing, and families in countries with a high prevalence of artificial feeding revert to suboptimal breast milk substitutes, such as diluted milk or yogurt, increasing the risk of undernutrition in infants. Emergencies are also too often exploited through the uncontrolled distribution of breast milk substitutes and donations of infant formula, which can undermine how infants and young children are fed and cared for during the emergencies and beyond. The protection, promotion, and support of optimal infant and young child feeding is therefore crucial. The infant feeding in emergencies core group, of which WHO is a member, published in 2001 the operational guidance for infant and young child feeding in emergencies to outline evidence-based action to safeguard the health of infants and young children in emergencies. A recent report by the IFE core group and Save the Children has highlighted the ground level coordination capacity and clear system for tracking progress lag behind in many countries. WHO supports health authorities to integrate interventions on optimal infant and young child feeding, essential nutrition services in partnership with the broader humanitarian and development communities. WHO is also continuously updating operational guidance and building national capacities to help frontline health workers to provide life-saving services during and after emergencies, along a continuum of care that covers the prevention and treatment of malnutrition in infants and young children. Current emergencies are teaching lessons that we need to consider, and I'm grateful to the National Institute of Health and UNICEF for having organized this event. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Branca. And your words reminds us this time that we are living, and I would like to send a special thanks to our colleagues from Ukraine. They will connect today, and thinking about evidence-based action to safeguard our kids in any situation. So thank you really so much. I didn't introduce Dr. Branca because I think everyone knows him, but just to remind that he's a director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. So thank you for being with us. Would you like to add something? It's fine? Okay. So let me introduce you now to Dr. Kremlin. I'm so sorry. I'm afraid I will. Thank you, Wickramasinghe. Sorry, because I have to train myself to Wickramasinghe, who is our new director of the European Office for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases of WHO Europe. So Dr. Kremlin sent to us a pre-recorded that we will show you in a minute.
Hello, I'm Kremlin Wickramasinghe from the WHO European Office for Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases. Thank you for the opportunity to speak few words at this very important event. We are focusing on infants and young child feeding. In WHO European region also, we are focusing strongly about promotion of breastfeeding and improving infant and young child feeding. But specifically in the context of emergencies, this has becoming more important than ever. And we are learning together with other stakeholders and member states what we need to do, how can we build the capacity. Because babies are vulnerable in emergencies, and also how they are fed is very linked to their vulnerability. Breastfed babies are protected in emergencies. Breastfeeding women are providing protection to their babies by breastfeeding. And that's why we think one of the best ways to help babies survive an emergency is to help their mothers to continue breastfeeding. We also know use of infant formula milk can come from various directions and promoted during emergency, which may put the the children's health at risk. The carers of artificially fed babies need intensive support and guidance from health professionals. And we also see donations of infant formula milks are massive and they reach emergencies and affected populations very fast, even more than what is required. The other essentials such as medicine and other essential food for adults and children. Therefore, focusing on the important aspects of donations is very important and tackle unwanted excess donation of infant formula milks. Focusing and ensuring adequate infant and young child feeding practices in emergency situation is relevant, and we need to start building this capacity as emergency preparedness. How can we engage with relevant stakeholders and health professionals before the emergencies to build this capacity, but also to ensure those standards and implementation during an emergency response. We are very happy our collaborating centers on childhood obesity, other experts, headquarters, and together with all of us, we could advance the importance of this topic, bringing it in the context of emergency preparedness and response also from the WHO European region. I wish you all a very good event, and we look forward to engaging with you and address this very important topic in the WHO European region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to add to what Angela said earlier. We really appreciate all the people who have taken time to connect from all over the world. We have speakers who are participating today from Canada, from Ukraine, from Croatia, from Alessandro's in New York. New York, so all over the world, and we really appreciate. That's one of the good side effects of COVID, I would say, is that we've become better at having these types of conferences and people who are speaking at them. Unfortunately, the president of UNICEF Italy is not able to be here today. We had a colleague of ours passed away overnight, and so I will read her greetings. Okay, here we go. So sorry, I'm making a mess of this. Okay, there we go. Good morning. I'm speaking on behalf of Elisa Grifantini, who is the head of advocacy at the Italian National Committee for UNICEF. First of all, I would like to say that our president asked me to send her your greetings and best wishes for the conference. Personally, I am pleased to be with you and to find so many people participating both in person and remotely, which I read as a significant sign of attention both to children and especially to those who are particularly vulnerable because they are born or live in emergency situations where our intervention as UNICEF is essential to be able to guarantee their rights. We are in a phase where, in addition to natural disasters, we are also faced with numerous conflicts, and where, as UNICEF, we are called upon to intervene promptly. I would like to thank the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, with whom we have a consolidated collaboration, for making available to us all such a prestigious and beautiful place to reflect together on the importance of infant and young child feeding in emergencies and the lessons we have taken from our collective experiences. In these circumstances, UNICEF prioritizes the protection, promotion, and support of breastfeeding in its response, while ensuring the nutritional needs of non-breastfeeding infants. We know that a woman can resume breastfeeding or consider wet nursing where appropriate, and we are convinced that every effort should be made to ensure that babies continue to be breastfed, since formula feeding is especially risky in emergencies. Today's presentations will underline how important it is to respect the International Code on the Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, which was mentioned by our previous greetings, in all phases of an emergency, not just the immediate post-emergency. Other nutritious foods, such as clothes, children's toiletries, baby blankets, water, diapers, funds to support infant feeding programs, can be donated for the benefit of mothers, infants, and young children instead of donating formula. I wish everyone today good work with the certainty that your experience and the lessons learned can lead to a world where fewer and fewer children will find themselves living such difficult moments. Thank you.
So I think we can now start our international session.
Yes, even
So-
ahead of time.
Hmm?
We're a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah, that's good. We are in Italy. You know about the prejudice about Italians being late. It's not always true.
That's right.
Okay, so let me introduce to you our first speaker. I'm very glad to invite here Dr. Muzna Mughal. Dr. Mughal is a consultant at the WHO European Office for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases. She has a background in clinical dietetics and a master's degree on nutrition for global health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. After 1 year of clinical practice in a hospital in Lebanon, she went on to specialize in nutrition in emergencies with a focus on maternal and child health. She has first-hand experience working in different humanitarian settings, including in refugee settings in Jordan and Lebanon, and more recently supporting the crisis in Ukraine. Her current role is the technical area of breastfeeding. She contributes to several ongoing regional activities to protect, promote, and support breastfeeding in Europe, including but not limited to coordinating courses on baby-friendly hospital initiative, organizing regular webinar series for member states, and contributing to ongoing technical support to countries in the regions related to promotion of breastfeeding. For me, it's a pleasure. We've been working for a while together, and I can tell that it's really nice to work together. Thank you, Muzna.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning and welcome, everybody. It's really great to see such a turnout. And thank you, Angela and team, for having me here. I'm very happy to be here at this event in person. My name is Muzna Mughal, and as Angela mentioned, I'm a consultant at the WHO European Office for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases. And my presentation today is on infant feeding in emergencies, the WHO guidelines, and other global documents. I'm aware there are quite a number of students in attendance today. But I'm aware that there are quite a number of students in attendance today, but also experienced health professionals. So this presentation serves as a bit of an introduction and basis for those of you who are new to the field, and perhaps a bit of a refresher for those who have some experience in the area. I will cover the goal of infant and young child feeding in emergencies response, why IYCFE is important, the WHO guidelines and the code, the IFE operational guidance, and finally, a brief overview of other relevant global documents. So the guidance is clear on breastfeeding in both usual and emergency contexts. Breastfeeding should be initiated within the first hour of birth. Exclusive breastfeeding is encouraged during the first 6 months of life. Infants should be breastfed on demand. And from the age of 6 months, healthy complementary foods should be introduced alongside breastfeeding up until the age of 2 years and beyond. The guidelines ensure the best possible start to life for a baby. In emergency contexts, however, these are even more important to adhere to as there is a higher risk of developing infections due to unsafe hygiene conditions. Often an issue is that mothers believe that stress can result in a limited supply of breast milk, but this is not true, and mothers should be guided to continue breastfeeding, as the suckling is what maintains the supply of milk. The breast milk substitute industry can also interfere through abundant donations of formula milk. And even in the case of insufficient food supply, the mother can continue to breastfeed her baby and keep it safer and healthier than if she were to stop breastfeeding entirely. So to start with, what is the goal of IYCFE response? The immediate focus and the goal of an IYCFE response is to do no harm and to save as many lives as possible in the shortest time period possible. It is to protect, promote, and support adequate infant and young child feeding practices. So to break it down, what this really means to protect is to preserve and keep safe the adequate practices that mothers and caregivers are already practicing prior to the onset of an emergency. And in emergencies, it can be challenging to continue adequate practices for many reasons. So through any response, a key priority is to avoid the uptake or deterioration into inadequate practices. So to promote, the goal is to raise awareness of and encourage the practice of recommended caring practices. And as for support, the aim is to create an enabling environment. This includes ensuring access to specialized support to caregivers when they experience challenges and helping them find workable solutions to problems that arise. Why is adequate IYCF important? So breastfeeding is one of the most effective ways to ensure child health and survival. However, unfortunately, nearly 2 out of 3 infants are not exclusively breastfed for the recommended 6 months, a rate which has not improved in 2 decades. The consequences of this are dire, as the risk of death within the first month of life is 33% for newborns who do not receive breast milk, 33% higher for newborns who do not receive breast milk within the first hour of birth. A further 820,000 lives can be saved annually through improved practices. There's also an economic aspect. Improved practices could add $300 billion to global economy yearly. During emergencies, many factors contribute to a significantly higher rate of child mortality, up to 70 times higher risk of death than average. The current inadequate practices are beyond breastfeeding and extend into the complementary feeding stage of life as well. For children aged between 6 to 23 months, only 52% reach minimum meal frequency standards, and only 29% reach minimum dietary diversity standards, which means that they are not consuming all the food groups that they should be for optimal growth. The health effects of these inadequate practices extend into the life cycle and contribute to stunting and various non-communicable diseases. So this slide is an at-a-glance overview of some of the guidelines, policies, and legislations which exist in the IYCF space and all serve to support adequate child feeding practices. Most of these are applicable not only on a day-to-day circumstance globally, but also in emergency situations. Today, I will cover 2 main resources, one of which is the WHO International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and subsequent World Health Assembly resolutions, also known as the Code, and the other is the operational guidance on IYCFE, which you will be hearing about throughout the day in several presentations, as it really serves as a primary reference for IYCF in emergencies. The International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and subsequent World Health Assembly resolutions was adopted in 1981. This was intended to set in stone the minimum requirement to protect and promote appropriate feeding, advocate for breastfeeding, and give clear guidance on the best available nutritional alternatives. It is not legally binding, but implementation is regarded as a key measure under the right to health in a number of international human rights treaties. The code aims to stop aggressive and inappropriate marketing of products. This is done through the protection and promotion of breastfeeding and the proper use of breast milk substitutes when these are necessary and on basis of adequate information and through appropriate marketing and distribution. The code sets out the responsibilities of the infant food industry, health workers, governments, and organizations. Supports informed decision-making that is impartial and free of commercial influences, and is endorsed by the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, which I will touch upon in a later slide. I want to highlight that while the implementation of the code is important globally in any circumstance, it is especially important in emergencies because, as we know, the formula milk donations are very common and not well regulated in emergencies, and they have very, very serious consequences. Reference guidance for infant and young child feeding in emergencies in specific is the operational guidance on infant and young child feeding in emergencies. This was first produced by the Interagency Working Group on Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergencies in 2001. And this working group included members of the IFE Core Group, which is an interagency collaboration concerned with the development of training materials and related policy guidance on infant and young child feeding in emergencies. It is intended for policymakers, decision makers, and programmers working in emergency preparedness and response, including governments, UN agencies, NGOs, donors, volunteer groups, and the private and business sector. The aim of this very comprehensive resource is to essentially serve as a concise and practical guidance note on how to ensure appropriate infant and young child feeding in emergencies and preparedness, to help minimize the risks of artificial feeding, and provide guidance on integrated multi-sector interventions, policy, training, coordination, and assessment and monitoring. It is applicable not only after the onset of an emergency, but also provides guidance on preparedness as well as post-emergency recovery. The guidance covers the infants and young children aged 0 to 23 months and pregnant and lactating women, which we know are two extremely vulnerable groups among a population dealing with an emergency. So I have spoken about the code and the operational guidance, but I also wanted to very briefly come to the many other global documents, guidelines, legislations, and policies that exist to support adequate infant and young child feeding. Very quickly, the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative is in place to give every baby the best start in life by creating a healthcare environment that supports breastfeeding as the norm. The Sphere Humanitarian Charter and Standards lays out the minimum standards in emergency situations to alleviate human suffering as much as possible. The Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, advocate for adequate infant and young child feeding through many different aspects. And the WHO Global Strategy for IYCF aims to revitalize efforts to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding. And lastly, the Innocenti Declaration. In 1990, this declaration set an international agenda for action to support optimal infant and young child feeding. And all of these resources are available online to help you better understand how and why adequate infant and young child feeding is and will be a key priority in promoting health globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Musna. That was wonderful to hear about all the ways that these documents connect with one another to reinforce messages that are so important and to ensure that we have one solid message about infant feeding in emergencies and what needs to be done. Thank you so much for presenting all that in such a brief and concise way.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, our next speakers are connecting to us from Ukraine. And there are two of them who will be speaking. I know them because they're both part of the Baby Friendly initiatives in Ukraine. We were able to meet up again for the first time in 4 years at our meeting in Brussels last June. And we heard about the situation of breastfeeding in Ukraine in June in Brussels. And we asked them to give us an update on what was happening now. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Lydia Romanenko, who is head of the Methodological Monitoring Center at the National Children's Specialized Hospital, Oxmatidit. Apologies for my pronunciation. She is the National BFHI Coordinator in Ukraine. She is a member of the Coordination Council of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine on the development of the BFHI. And she will be speaking together with Dr. Olga Shmenkevich, who is a Ukrainian pediatrician and PhD. In 1987, she graduated from the pediatric faculty at the Lviv State Medical University. Since 1991, she has worked as a neonatologist in the maternity department of the Lviv Regional Clinic in perinatal care. And from 2006, she has been the chief of the Lviv Regional Breastfeeding Support Center. And since 2000, she has been a member of the National BFHI Committee. I want to thank you both again for connecting and being here, and I will hand the floor over to you, Olga. Wait a second, Olga, your mic isn't on. Can you turn your mic on?
Yes. Good morning,
Perfect.
everybody.
Great, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Just a moment.
Okay.
Do you see my presentation?
Almost. We see your desktop. Okay, I see you're clicking on PowerPoint.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Wait, can you put it in presentation mode?
What?
Presentation mode.
You don't see it?
We see it, but not big. If you can click on
Okay, yes. Now it's good.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, Lydia Romanenko and me to participate in this meeting. And our presentation is the emergency in Ukraine, the war, focus on breastfeeding. But in the beginning of my presentation, I would like to give you a little information about about success in the implementation of Baby-Friendly Hospital initiative in Ukraine before the war. Ukraine was a beautiful country with happy people, and it was till the 24th of February 2022. The BFHI has been actively implemented in maternal and child health facilities since 2001. National BFHI criteria were adopted by respective order of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, which currently operates. 2 more steps to 10 steps to successful breastfeeding have been adopted by the order. The 11th step, monitoring compliance with the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, and the 12th step, monitoring compliance with effective perinatal care practices, partner delivery, opportunity to choose the delivery position, etc., according to WHO 2009, mother-friendly care. Expanded BFHI in Ukraine covers all types of mother and child health care institutions, maternity hospitals, children's hospitals, children's outpatient departments, and antenatal clinics. Expanded BFHI National Methodological and Monitoring Center was created in Kyiv in 2006. The center operates and manages the implementation of BFHI in Ukraine. Expanded BFHI centers were established and operated in all 24 regions of Ukraine until 2014, when Crimea was annexed by Russia and some parts of the eastern regions were separated. In some statistical data. In 2021, about 40% of all mother and child health facilities were designated as baby-friendly hospital. 92% of maternity facilities were designated as baby-friendly hospital. Almost all maternity hospitals are baby-friendly. 88.5% of children were born in baby-friendly hospital. Breastfeeding initiation rate was 93.3%. According to state statistics, exclusive breastfeeding from 0 to 6 months rate was 56% in all medical institutions and 75.6% in medical institutions designated as baby-friendly hospital. Last year, we have a very significant event in our country. On October 21, the President of Ukraine signed a law in the field of child nutrition to ensure that Ukrainian legislation meets the requirements of European Union legislation. The decree reflects the requirements of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. Now I will tell you about Ukraine since the beginning of the war. On the slide, you can see just a little what Russian army destroyed in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 826 medical facilities were damaged and more than 130 have been completely destroyed. As of October 23 this year, 450 children died and more than 820 were injured of various degree of severity. In cities where active hostilities are taking place or airstrikes or air alarms, hospitals are forced to use basements to protect mothers with newborns. In such situations, infants breastfed in basements. Now I would like to tell you about experience of some perinatal centers during the war. Kharkiv Perinatal Center, it's in the eastern part of Ukraine. This center was first affected during the war. The picture illustrates how the conditions in which mothers and children stay have changed since the beginning of the war, rooming before the war and during the war. Perinatal center was working when enemy shells exploded within a radius of about 200 meters from the building and the electricity and water supply disappeared. Chernihiv Perinatal Center, it's in the northern part of Ukraine, the period of active military actions. When Chernihiv was bombed day and night, doctors in the bomb shelter delivered babies and performed cesarean section. Odessa Perinatal Center, it's in the south part of Ukraine. There is no active military actions, but regular risk of missile strikes. During the missile strikes, then sirens sound, mothers with children are forced to hide in bomb shelters or basements. In the pictures, mothers with children listen to a lecture on breastfeeding. Kyiv Perinatal Center, it's in the central part of Ukraine. There is no active military actions, but regular risk of missile strikes. The first breast milk bank in Ukraine was established on the basis of this center in 2019. In difficult conditions of wartime, all equipment of the perinatal center worked regularly. Milk received from a small number of donors is used for children in the intensive care unit, for premature infants in the perinatal center and other maternity hospitals in Kyiv. At the same time, the mothers receive support with initiation of lactation. Lviv Perinatal Center, it's in the west part of Ukraine. I work in the center. There is no risk of active military action, but regular risk of missile strikes. When there are no sirens, despite the martial law and a disturbing atmosphere, the perinatal center operates as usual for local and refugees or displaced persons. Since the beginning of the war, internally displaced mothers have given birth to 693 babies, including 11 twins. Antenatal classes on breastfeeding for pregnant women are held, partner births are practiced, mothers are consulted on breastfeeding, and babies are breastfed. Now, information about consulting a woman on breastfeeding during the war. Medical institutions and NGOs engaged in assistance. First of all, it's state maternity hospitals or clinics. Each baby-friendly hospital institution has trained health professionals who can provide qualified advice on breastfeeding. Breastfeeding support centers, private clinics, NGOs are involved in breastfeeding support. These include a strong network of mother-to-mother support groups, which are established in large regional centers and conduct information and advisory activities on breastfeeding. Medical institutions cooperate with NGOs. Many internet sites supporting breastfeeding are created and operate in Ukraine. There are many educational videos on various breastfeeding issues on YouTube channel. Maternal and child health facilities have their own website there. It is possible to find information on breastfeeding. Breastfeeding mother-to-mother support groups also have their own web page with information about breastfeeding. In the online mode, mothers can ask questions and receive consultation by breastfeeding professionals. The internet page contains the telephone number of breastfeeding counselors who can provide online help. In the emergency of a military conflict in Ukraine, mothers particularly appreciate breastfeeding. Breast milk is the only available food when moms are in bomb shelters or basements, when fleeing shelling, when moving to safe places by train, in conditions when there is no water and electricity. Milk is always clean, warm, and nutritious food. About humanitarian aid. In each locality, there is humanitarian aid headquarters where aid is received, and from there it is distributed to place where in need. Maternity and children's hospitals receive breast milk substitutes and medical nutrition for non-breastfed infants. Medical facilities are also provided by age-appropriate feeding for infants and young children aged 6 to 23 months. In cities where hostilities are taking place, mother or caregivers can receive the baby food in humanitarian aid headquarters. Preference is given to supply of liquid formula to places of active hostilities. The problem is the lack of proper control or the compliance with the requirements of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and relevant presidential decree. Psychological support is extremely important in times of war. It can be obtained in medical institutions, in psychological support center. Special NGOs provide free psychological counseling by phone. A telephone hotline operates 24 hours throughout Ukraine. Assistance of a multidisciplinary team is of specialists, which includes a psychologist. A psychologist works with every internally displaced person in the perinatal center where I work. The mothers who fled from Kharkiv experienced highly depressive conditions after witnessing active hostilities. One of my patients would always start crying when she heard the sirens. A psychologist works in such conditions. The patients receive help from all medical staff. We have some successful stories of mothers discharged from home with the ability to breastfeed. Hotline telephone numbers of psychologists' help in Ukraine are published on the website of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. Organizations which most actively support breastfeeding in Ukraine are UNICEF, Nutrition Cluster, the Center for Social Leaderships. All these organizations hold a variety of activities for the most vulnerable population, including infant and young children, aimed at protecting and promoting safe and appropriate methods of their feeding. UNICEF has developed a large number of informational materials on breastfeeding and feeding young children during the war. All these materials were spread, delivered to all medical institutions. Also, we are very, very grateful to the Italian office of UNICEF, which in the first days of the war provided Ukraine with new information materials on breastfeeding and young child feeding in emergencies for supporting migrants and refugees. Despite all the difficulties over time, breastfeeding doesn't not lose its value. Ukrainian singers create and sing songs dedicated to children and breastfeeding. A photo of Ukrainian woman feeding her 3-month-old daughter in the Kiev metro during the bombing of the city by the Russian army became a symbol of the victory of good other evil, life other death. This inspired the artist Marina Solomenkova to paint a picture, Ukrainian Madonna, which became the prototype of the icon of the Virgin Mary in one of the temples of Naples. On behalf of all Ukrainians, we would like to thank the representatives of Italy and other countries participating in this meeting for supporting our country and protecting the health and lives of our children. We wish everyone peace and prosperity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olga, for that really moving presentation. It's always incredible to see the resilience of the people in Ukraine in these absolutely incredible, difficult conditions. All of the activities that you are able to do as though things were still normal, even though they aren't normal at all, and the help, the psychological support system that has been set up are amazing. Of course, I was happy to see the breastfeeding rates in your baby-friendly hospitals, which are just even higher than what the WHO and UNICEF recommend, and that's really wonderful to see how a baby-friendly atmosphere can impact on breastfeeding. I'm sure everyone noticed the infographics that Olga presented. You might have seen them also when you were entering the building. There's a series of lighted panels with various projects and materials that have been developed. And I need to thank the National Institute of Health here as well. We did those infographics in collaboration with them, and they have proven to be an excellent resource. They've also been translated. They were originally available in English, Ukrainian, obviously, English and Italian. They've also been translated into Spanish and German. So it's always nice when you see that something that you worked on is useful, and it's especially nice to see that it's helpful to you in this situation. So thank you again. If you can stay until the question and answer section, that would be helpful. Can you stay? Okay, great. Then I will turn the microphone back over to Angela for our next speaker.
Thank you, Olga. So let me introduce to you the next speaker. It's Alessandro Iellamo, and the title is "The Impact of the War in Ukraine on Women's infant feeding choices and practices, Initial Reflections." We know Alessandro Iellamo since a long time. He is a senior emergency nutrition advisor for Family Health International 360, supporting and maternal, infant, and young child nutrition specialist. He has extensive expertise in nutrition and infant and young child feeding policies and practices, particularly in emergencies, the WHO International Code, the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative, and operational guidance, and other global tools. He has worked with the WHO Scientific and Technical Advisory Group on the International Code and assisted the International Baby Food Action Network with the development of the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative that we know in Italy too. We are quite involved in Italy. And the World Breastfeeding Costing Tool. He has also been involved in the research in the area of mother and child health, infant feeding in emergency policies and programs. He supported humanitarian work in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, and Southeast Asia. He has led the development of the recently infant and young child feeding in emergency tools and guidance documents and facilitated international and national policies and guidance development processes. Recently, he has been engaged with the infant and young child feeding in emergency related policy issues in high-income countries, including Italy, Australia, and Japan. So, Alex, are you with us? Yeah? Okay. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And I hope, can you confirm you can hear me well?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks for the kind words. So I'm currently in Yemen, so let's pray that the connection will be stable. And thank you again to the organizer for the invitation. And it's really inspiring to see and to hear the colleagues, both on the ground and international colleagues and national colleagues, in sharing the great work that is being supported at all levels with the main aim to protect and support women and their children, and I would say the family as a whole. And I was very inspired to listen to our colleague from Ukraine on the great amount of work that, despite the difficult times, is still going on. And I will share what FHI 360 started doing in Ukraine and a neighboring country like Poland. So just for the sake of ensuring that we all know a bit of FHI 360, we started in 71. And we are an organization, international organization based in Washington, D.C., and with a strong nutrition sector, strong nutrition program, both in development and humanitarian and crisis context in more than 60 countries. And these are the countries where we have active responses, active emergency responses. These are the sectors that we're focusing on. And as mentioned in several occasions, we are also an active member of the Global Nutrition Cluster and the Infant Feeding in Emergencies core group. I think the case for breastfeeding was made. I don't think it's a question or there is a doubt, but certainly not among ourselves in this room or online. But I don't know for what reasons, whenever we respond or we start working on the ground, is being either ignored or is being doubted. And again, I'm not repeating the figures that our colleague from WHO Europe has already highlighted and expounded on. I intentionally would like to ask the audience online and in presence to look at these photos. I intentionally excluded photos or situations from low-income developing countries, depending on which term you want to use. I intentionally, deliberately use photos from high-income countries just to, again, reiterate, repeat, emphasize, and highlight that no matter the context, when an emergency strikes, domestic, international, women, their children are among the most affected. And I think, again, the photos visibly, clearly show you can just imagine the trauma, the issues that these women are facing in ensuring and protecting their own infants. And these are some recent photos from Ukraine. Now, when we all started supporting Ukraine, and again, our colleague mentioned the Global Nutrition Cluster and the different members, there was a clear realization. Yes, women and children and infants are among the most affected, but we felt, and we had clear reasons for doing so, that their nutrition needs were not always prioritized, in particular, their infant and young children feeding needs. There were already a few titles that were coming out from online releases, both from Save the Children, saying as of April already there were 63,000 newborns, and UNICEF was calling for support for more than 400,000 children to ensure that they were meeting their nutritional needs, children below the age of 2. And we have met in our work in Ukraine, women, and in Poland, so refugees, women, and interview them. I'll give you more details on the work we have been starting. And this woman was extremely powerful in what she was saying. And she was telling us during these interviews, and these were done through local groups in local language, in Ukrainian, I can only formula feed. I am alone. I don't have my husband. I don't have a family. I don't have my relatives. It's me and my baby alone. I have no support, so I can only formula feed. So that's the start for me of this presentation. And for us to focus on, again, what women affected by a conflict, a war like the one in Ukraine, may have been going through or may go through as we speak. So what FHI 360 decided to do, and we did it in September, was to conduct a nutrition assessment, but focusing on infantile child feeding, but looking at answering few questions, right? How has the conflict changed the mother's choices, the mother's decisions, the mother's plan to feed their infants? And also, what are the critical actions and investment that will be needed so that we can protect those women during emergencies? And again, how can we mobilize governments and donors to support infant feeding practices in Ukraine? So again, from the donor community has not been extremely interested, if I may use the term, in funding or scaling up infantile and child feeding programming in country. So what we did were interviews with women. 75 women were interviewed, 45 in Ukraine, 30 on the Polish side. We met with lactation counselors, around 14 of them. We visited relocation centers for displaced Ukrainians in Ukraine as well as in Poland. We visited a regional hospital in Poland. We have engaged the Blue Dots. These are safe spaces created by UNICEF. And also we met some government coordinators of the various relocation centers. These all through local partners that are actively providing, for example, psychosocial support, like the one mentioned by our colleague. What I'm going to share are not the results, but just some highlights from this initial assessment, right? The results will be published and shared, hopefully by the end of November. We are hardly working to finalize the processing, the cleaning, and so on and so forth. But what are the reflections? And what came out from the conversation with those women and those counselors, those lactation counselors? Infant nutrition, in particular breastfeeding, seems to be unseen, seems not to be a recognized priority, again, by the international organizations. I'm focusing on the international organizations and the donors, and there is very limited support in place across the various contact points, not just, and I'm really happy, I agree with our UNICEF colleague when I see that maternity hospitals are really trying to protect and support breastfeeding. There is a fear among professionals that the breastfeeding situation may deteriorate. There is also a fear among the lactation consultants that, and you will see it later, that there has been an enormous amount of donations that was also that is unjustified. Because these donations are basically flooding all the centers where displaced Ukrainians as well as refugees are staying with no education, no cleaning utensils, not any form of support. And again, some of the women among the most vulnerable are basically not able to access the support they need in relation to feeding their infants. Some anecdotes among the women, and I will tell you more in the next slides. All women were asked, most those that basically left Ukraine, crossing the border for Poland, most of them were feeding on how am I going to feed my baby during that journey, and how I will feed him once in Poland or once in another country. Several women confirmed having plans to breastfeed, but eventually didn't. They felt having conditions, most likely the psychosocial, the stress. Many women that were interviewed confirmed, as I said, having plans to breastfeed, but the migration, the conflict, the lack of support, the fears have affected those plans. Most of the women confirmed receiving donations of milk, even if they were happily breastfeeding. We met several vulnerable groups among the women, like adolescent mothers, and they confirm being lost and using whatever they have in their humanitarian packs, and that includes infant formula. Some of the women are also concerned about the quality of foods they are receiving, or at least the appropriateness, no? And they all had plans to give something else, but for now, what they receive is what they have, and that's what they can give. So some of the quotes, and these are quotes, again, not analyzed. We are not saying that this represents the overall situation. We will have a better report soon. But it's important to highlight what, again, the experience of the women have been, or it is, as of the time we are speaking. And this mother was saying, I didn't receive any support. I have no relatives. I have no parents, no husband. I did have a pediatrician asking me about why I wasn't breastfeeding. I did explain, and then he was trying to recommend formulas, but there were no formulas that I could buy. Another mother was saying, all pharmacies at certain points were closed. There was no humanitarian aid as well, and so I had to find an old woman to give me cow's milk. A mom was highlighting the need for complementary foods, or appropriate complementary foods, and she says, obviously, her desire was to give her fresh fruits, fresh meat to her child, but so far only canned goods. I have no other choice. And then some mother was also talking about her birth experience during the war. And again, the situation that may not obviously, not always encourage or support the start of breast milk or the start of breastfeeding, the initiation, due to multiple conditions. So these are some of the 75 women in both Poland and Ukraine. As I said, we also heard from the lactation counselors that are doing also, they're also contributing on their own, with their own resources to provide some breastfeeding support. And some of them said that, yes, breastfeeding is part of the programs, but was not always a very top priority. They feel that there was a lack of skilled lactation consultants in some of the maternity hospitals. And again, they acknowledge that what they see clearly is the enormous amount of infant formula distributed by multiple organizations without any criteria, without providing any additional support. And I think on the positive note is the solidarity among those consultants that independently created this network. And this network is trying to answer questions that are raised through Facebook and some of the social media that I believe were mentioned also before by colleagues in Ukraine. So again, the solidarity and the fact that they started with their own resources, again, I think it's very important to highlight, to provide their own support. But is this isolated to Ukraine? Is this just because Ukraine is a high-income, middle-income country? No, this is our perennial challenge. This is our challenge when we operate and respond. It can be Yemen, where I am now, it can be Somalia. Maybe it can be Italy, Angela can say more, it can be the US or Canada, or Australia. We know, nothing new. We know displacement, stress, fear, insecurity as negatively impact infant feeding practices. Unfortunately, we see it takes time. Generally, there is no immediate support or attention given to infant feeding. And again, it has been mentioned by Francesco earlier, by everybody. Donations, fines are the first to come. The door is always open, even if when they are not appropriate, when they are not needed, and when they don't even meet the nutritional needs of infants. And there is a lot being documented, as you can see on the right. And again, we practitioners, all of us in this room, all of us online, knows that this has been the situation. So Ukraine is not new, it's just I would say, the tip of the iceberg, maybe the most visible at this today. What are we urgently calling for? The IFE core group, other agencies, ISS, WHO, UNICEF, are certainly moving the agenda forward, but we need a strong thought leadership, evidence gathering. We need a strong advocacy. We need accountability from governments. And I'm very glad the Italian government, through the ISS, has spearheaded this activity, but we need to elevate our advocacy. And certainly, in the case of Ukraine, but also other responses, other emergencies, we need more scalable, large programs that support infant feeding, even when we are working in emergency where we don't have wasting as a priority issue, right? There is a lot of misunderstandings and confusion between nutrition priorities in an emergency. And for many, unfortunately, and the donor community as well, is limited to the level of wasting that you experience or you measure, you assess. What are we calling for? Yeah, let's publish, and I think it has happened. Let's inform the community on what women are experiencing during this emergency. And I know Angela and the team published something recently on the earthquake in Abruzzo, for example, in Italy. We need a global advocacy because we need investments. We need investments to be able to address this situation, to be able to create support. And again, I think we need large-scale programming. We do have great experiences sometimes, and these are mostly born from individuals or organizational initiatives. But we need systematic, large-scale responses to protect and promote infant feeding, and also, I would say, maternal nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for giving us that the information that was gathered from those interviews, which really can offer so much that goes beyond just the numbers. Thank you so much for sharing your experience in Ukraine and a bit in Yemen, and you certainly are all over the place. I see in the chat that you are based in Washington, but currently in Yemen. So we now come to another speaker who is coming to us from far away, Jodine Chase, and I'm happy to introduce her. She's a business and communications professional who divides her time between providing strategic consulting services to senior executives and CEOs and working to protect and advance maternal and infant health and well-being. Jodine has been the IFE core group facilitator for in the Emergency Nutrition Network since May of this year. And she's speaking to us, I believe, from Edmonton, Alberta in Canada. Is that right, Jodine? Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And yes, that is correct. And also, I thank you for agreeing to display and advance my slides. I had some trouble making that work remotely. So there we go. So you did introduce me as Jodine Chase. I am the facilitator for the IFE Infant Feeding and Emergencies, or IFE core group. And thank you very much for inviting me to share with you some of our reflections on what we have learned from the recent emergencies in Europe. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share with you today, as Alex did, very few of the many examples of the mounting challenges that we face in attempting to respond effectively to support infant and young child feeding in the face of emergencies and disasters and crisis after crisis occurring in high and middle income countries in recent years. I'm going to move fairly rapidly through these slides just to touch on some incidents that will help remind us all how many of these situations are occurring. So here we have people being rescued off of beaches in Turkey and Australia during wildfires. Next slide. This particular slide is evacuations due to flooding in a very crowded and dangerous looking boat in Europe. Next slide, please. Here is contamination that has created water crises in Iqaluit in my country of Canada in the far north in Nunavut. And you can also see an image of people gathering water in Cape Town, South Africa during their water shortage in 2018. Next slide. In the Flint water crisis in the United States in 2016, as many as 1 in 4 children had lead contamination, had elevated lead levels after that water contamination incident. Last slide, please. So we're all familiar with the refugee crisis across Europe in 2016 and 17. Over 60% of the displaced populations that arrived in Greece during that time were pregnant women, mothers with newborns, infants, and young children. Next slide, please. Many countries are experiencing surges of refugees and asylum seekers, some in situations that they've never encountered before. Arriving with infants and young children. This is in my country in Montreal with asylum seekers coming across the border from the United States. And this was just a few years ago. Next slide, please. So you heard earlier today from Musna, and we heard also earlier this year from the World Health Organization about how the pervasive, misleading, and aggressive marketing from the $55 billion a year formula milk industry causes harm. And this is especially true during emergencies, where we all have seen the floods of donations and uncontrolled distribution of breast milk substitutes and infant foods. This undermines appropriate infant and young child feeding practices, both during the emergency and beyond. So the IFE core group was created just over 20 years ago to address many of these challenges. It's a global collaboration of agencies and individuals. And we developed operational guidance, and you can see that yellow booklet that many of you are familiar with in the edge of this picture. Our guidance with evidence-based actions to safeguard life-saving infant and young child feeding in emergencies. Addressing harmful donations is only one part, but an important part of our guidance. Next slide, please. In 2010, the World Health the World Health Assembly called on all member nations to incorporate our OPS guidance into national emergency plans. And this we know is needed to keep all infants and young children that are experiencing emergencies safe, including those who are reliant on breast milk substitutes. So high and middle income countries have the world's lowest uptake of our operational guidance. And here you can see the work of some of your colleagues here today, showing this very low score for infant and young child feeding in emergencies in 18 European countries. I think you are going to be learning more about the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative, which is where this system of measurement comes from later today. So what we know is that there's an overall lack of IYCFE preparedness in high and middle income countries, and not just in Europe, around the world. The experience of recent emergencies, crises, and of course the war in Ukraine point to a very strong need for European countries to move quickly, for all high-income countries to move quickly to take this step and incorporate our operations guidance into your national emergency plans. Next slide, please. In our recent report, looking at 10 years of progress around the globe to take this action of incorporating into emergency plans, we found a very large number of high and middle income countries that are not investing in IYCFE activities. And the data shows that of the countries that didn't invest at all, most are high or middle income countries, with only a small number of those being low income countries. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? This map here is information that we already know. The countries in blue are donor countries, and those in red are recipient countries of foreign aid. Our low-income countries, the recipients of foreign aid, are investing. They are investing in IYCFE. But our high-income countries, the donor countries, are not doing so. So we agree, I think, that our high-income countries must take fast action and put IYCFE measures in place, not just for our own citizens, but as a critical part of ensuring that our international contributions are effective. As Alex has noted, we don't see enough funding specifically targeted to IYCFE, but we are seeing some signs that when we in high-income countries elevate our own understanding of the needs of infants and young children and their feeding needs in emergencies, we put ourselves in a better position to ensure the targeted donor funds that can address these failures and allow for more adequately supported infant and young child feeding in emergency responses in low-income countries. Next slide, please. So let's take a quick look at one country. Ireland has made substantial international funding commitments. Some say Ireland punches above its weight, that specifically target vulnerable infants and young children. For many years, Ireland has funded the work that has led to and sustained our global operations guidance for IYCFE. So Ireland is now moving to incorporate our guidance into their own cross-border Pan-Ireland emergency response plans. And they're strengthening their code legislation that is currently moving through their legislature system. So in the words of Ireland's President Michael Higgins, what is it that is stopping governments and policymakers from seeing that recovering and promoting breastfeeding could make one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest contribution to children's health and nutrition? I'm confident that Ireland's strengthening of their own systems, rules, and supports for IYCFE will make Ireland an even more effective global citizen when it comes to international contributions for IYCFE. Next slide, please. So today at this conference, you are taking important steps, not just for your own citizens, but you're taking important steps towards ensuring that your international contributions will be effective through the learnings that you have gained and will gain as you work to incorporate appropriate IYCFE measures into your country's emergency preparedness and response activities. And so for this important work, we thank you. Next slide. I will leave you now with this resource that was prepared by the IFE Core Group for this conference with the assistance of several of our members, including Alex's FHI 360 and my colleagues at Safely Fed Canada. This is a handy one-page information sheet with the European-focused one-page both sides. With European-focused IYCFE resources, you can access it at the URL on the screen, or you can also use the QR code on this slide to access it from our website. And I thank you very much again for inviting me to present.
Ok, thank you Judith. Just in Italian, le cose che avete visto mostrate qui sono fuori esposte nei poster, quindi potete fotografarle e rivederle quando volete, oppure fare riferimento al QR code. Because we have it, we have exposed your posters outside the room. Okay.
Thanks again, Jodine, for really describing so well the sort of overall lack of preparedness and the fact that high-income countries really need to kickstart their efforts for infant and young child feeding in emergencies. I think Ireland is a fantastic example and something that many people here in the room and online can relate to in terms of a country that's part of the EU, and so facing the same sort of challenges that the rest of us have. Okay, Our final speaker this morning is speaking to us today from Croatia. So we've done a little trip around the world this morning. Her name is Irena Zakarića-Grgović, and she is an academic at the University of Split School of Medicine, where she teaches and conducts research on family medicine, clinical skills, evidence-based medicine, and breastfeeding medicine. She is a founding and active member of the National Breastfeeding Committee in Croatia. She's also the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative Coordinator. You saw the data that Jodine presented, and she is the coordinator for Croatia and for Europe. And she is also leading a Ministry of Health working group tasked with preparing Croatia's first infant and young child feeding and emergencies guidelines. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Irena. I'll pass the floor to you.
Buongiorno a tutti. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today to you about the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative and how it can be used as a monitoring and advocacy tool for protecting infant and young child feeding in emergencies. I will be using the acronyms WBTI and IYCF in emergencies to save time. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Instead, I've listed some of my interests related to this topic so that you may get a better perspective of where I'm coming from. Today I'll be speaking a bit about the WBTI and how it can help us monitor IYCF in emergencies. Then we'll have a look at the state of IYCF in emergencies in Europe, then in Italy, and finally touch upon how the WBTI can help us advocate for the protection of IYCF in emergencies. So what is the WBTI? It's a tool for assessing implementation of the global strategy for infant and young child feeding in a particular country in a standard way. It was introduced back in 2004 by Dr. Arun Gupta, a pediatrician from India, who together with his team at the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India designed a tool based on the WHO's Tool for National Assessment of Policy and Programs on IYCF. The WBTI tool helps generate country reports on implementation of the global strategy, and these reports are then published on the WBTI website, which therefore serves as a global data repository on IYCF. Currently, there are 98 country reports from all around the world on the WBTI website, and I'm glad to say that Italy, as well as Croatia, are among them. So how is a report produced? Firstly, a country coordinator needs to be nominated. This must be a person without conflicts of interest, who is also preferably in good standing with relevant authorities, such as the Ministry of Health, UNICEF Office, and Public Health Institution. The country coordinator then undergoes a 3-day training program conducted by the central WBTI team. Once this has been done, the country coordinator needs to put together a core group of assessors. The core group usually consists of approximately 5 people representing the different relevant interested parties, such as health professionals, government representatives, and parenting organisation representatives. The core group's task is to collect information, conduct an assessment, and prepare a preliminary report. This preliminary report is then shared with relevant partners for review and comment. Once the feedback has been incorporated into the report as appropriate, it's forwarded to the central WBTI team or secretariat, where it undergoes analysis and verification. Once this has been completed, the final report is then published on the WBTI website. Here you can see on the right part of the front cover of the 61-page Croatian WBTI report, and on the left the brief report card which provides an overview of the indicators. As you can see, the WBTI tool looks at 15 different indicators, 10 related to policy and program and 5 to practices. The policy and program indicators are scored out of 10 and color-coded, with green representing the highest code for codes above 9, then blue represents codes between 7 and 9, yellow codes between 4 and 6.5, and red for scores less than 4. These are the WBTI policy and program indicators. Each indicator has its key question and specific assessment criteria to help the core team conduct the assessment. In the report, all information sources need to be stated, with preference always given to national data. In addition, the report states the gaps in implementation of the indicator and provides recommendations on how the indicator can be improved. And finally, a conclusion is made. Now I'd like to look more closely at the WBTI indicator 9 on infant and young child feeding during emergencies. These are the specific criteria for assessment. Now, Elise, is it possible to enlarge the screen at all? Because I was hoping to go through each of the individual criteria, but it's very, very small on my screen. And even with my glasses, I can barely read it. Is that possible? If not, I'll have to open the document on my computer and look at that. So I'm just doing that while you...
I think you may need to do it yourself. Unfortunately, we can see it fairly well here. So if you don't mind putting on your, or no, enlarging your stuff again for you, we can see it. We have a big screen here, so.
Okay. Okay. Just a second, I'm going to open my document. Here we go.
No worries.
Okay, so criterion number 1 states that the country has a comprehensive policy on IYCF and emergency as per the global recommendations stated in the operational guidance, and this can be awarded 2 points. The second criterion states that persons have been tasked to coordinate and implement the national policy and that they have been appointed both at the national and subnational levels. This also carries 2 points. Criterion 3 contains several recommendations on what an emergency preparedness and response plan or action plan based on the policy should contain. And these recommendations include creating an enabling environment for breastfeeding, including counselling by appropriately skilled counsellors, and support for relactation and wet nursing, measures to protect, promote and support appropriate and safe complementary feeding, measures to protect and support non-breastfed infants, creating safe spaces for IYCF counselling, undertaking measures to minimise the risks of artificial feeding, including an endorsed joint statement on avoidance of donations of breast milk substitutes, bottles and teats, and standard procedures for handling unsolicited donations, which we heard about in the previous presentations. And finally, setting up a monitoring system to monitor and evaluate the emergency response in the context of IYCF. Criterion 4 specifies that adequate financial and human resources should be allocated for implementation of the emergency preparedness and response plan. And the final criterion states that appropriate orientation, or second last criterion states that appropriate orientation, including training materials on infant and young child feeding in emergencies, has been integrated into pre-service and in-service training of relevant personnel. And finally, the sixth criteria states that orientation and training is taking place as per the National Action Plan and is aligned with the global recommendations. As you can see, the maximum score is 10 And these criteria are considered the minimal standard of what a country should do in order to support infant and young child feeding during emergencies. Back in 2020, I led a group of WBTI European coordinators and researchers in producing a report on the state of implementation of the global strategy for infant and young child feeding in 18 European countries. The full report, as well as a summary paper published in the International Breastfeeding Journal, are freely available at the WBTI website. My previous speaker gave away the results of the report because I was going to ask you to guess which indicator received the lowest score. Well, unfortunately, as you know, it's indicator 9, that is the protection of infant and young child feeding in emergencies. As you can see, it's severely neglected in the European region. This is followed closely by having a national IYCF policy, which is also in the red. And as you can see, none of the indicators are colour-coded green, that is, none of them scored highly. This is a map of the countries that we looked at, together with their total scores, that is, scores for both programs and practices, based on their WBTI reports. And again, unfortunately, there are no countries colour-coded green. Thanks to Dottoressa Marica Bettinelli, I can share with you the state of infant and young child feeding in Italy based on their 2018 WBTI assessment. Similar to the European report, IYCF in emergencies is also the indicator with the lowest score, followed by national IYCF policy, program and coordination. And again, unfortunately, there are no green colour-coded indicators. This is the list of partners that were involved in producing the report for Italy. And the good news is that there is a new report underway, which should hopefully be published by the end of next year. Good luck with that. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to draw the attention of national and European politicians and policymakers to the importance of optimal IYCF. We want to raise awareness among national and European politicians and policymakers of the current substandard IYCF policies, programs and practices in Europe. By conducting a WBTI report, we want to highlight gaps in IYCF policies and practices so that national and European decision makers know where to invest resources. Based on the WBTI report, we want to provide recommendations on best practices in Europe and how policies and programs can be improved. And finally, we want to motivate all countries in the European region to take part in the WBTI and repeat their evaluation on a regular basis, because it is important to follow trends in implementation of the global strategy. This is in line with the Global Breastfeeding Collective's call for action, an initiative led by UNICEF and the WHO, which calls for governments to implement 7 policy actions, one of which is strengthening monitoring of IYCF policies and practices, and here the WBTI is the perfect tool for that. So if you want to get involved or if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me or someone from the WBTI. Finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite you to the next Regional European Conference of the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, which will be held in my hometown of Split next year in May, and during which there will be a special session on economics and inequalities in breastfeeding, as well as a pre-conference symposium on IYCF indicators. We also plan to organise a meeting for WBTI European coordinators. So I hope to see as many of you as possible next year in Croatia. Grazie.
Grazie a te. Thank you so much, Irena. That was wonderful to see all of the work that's going on and underlining how important it is to have data when we talk about things that need to happen. The Global Breastfeeding Collective's call to action is a very important document that tries to do just that. And I certainly hope that when Italy's report comes out at the end of the year, we'll have some progress to show. I've seen some of the people who work on the WETI in Italy are online today. So it's great that they're able to get a little free publicity for their work as well. Looking forward to the ABM conference in Croatia. It sounds very exciting. And I guess we are now at our Q&A section. And so if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. Se c'è qualcuno in aula che vuol fare una domanda, fatevi avanti. Abbiamo dei microfoni a disposizione, così chi è collegato può ascoltare i vostri interventi. I was just explaining that if anyone who's in here would like to ask a question.
E lì si occuperà della traduzione simultanea in inglese. Non preoccupatevi, potete fare le domande in italiano. Giusto, Elise?
Yes, I will translate for you. Assolutamente. I don't know if we've received any questions online.
No, not yet. So maybe waiting for a question, if we have questions, I just would like to highlight something about the Italian situation, because we will speak with my colleague Francesca Marchetti in the Italian session. But for our international guests, I would like just to say 2 words about what we are going through in Italy. And I would like you, Elise, please, to integrate what I'm saying. Listening to all our guests, especially Alex and Irena, I was thinking that in Italy, infant feeding in emergency is not an issue. This is what is my personal perception. What I mean by this is the idea is that as far as a baby has a mother and a father during an emergency, his or her needs are addressed. This is the idea, but maybe after Francesca will tell you more about this. In Italy, we have a very well organized, we had any kind of emergency you can imagine. So earthquakes, migrations, and floods, and whatever. And our system, led by the Protezione Civile, is very well organized. It's a perfect machine. And speaking with people, our colleagues in the regions, I took some notes just not to forget anything. And we have a system for children's need. Children had special procedure for many things, from safety food provision and hair lice prevention, which is a problem in emergency. It's true, because we have many children together, and it's not the major public health problem, let's say, but it's an issue, and we have procedure for this, but we don't have a procedure for infant feeding, for the reason that I said, because they are invisible. They have a mom, a dad, so why should we care for feeding of babies? And I think this has also to do with the normalization of formula feeding. If we don't have breastfeeding, there is formula, so why should we worry about that? And having been working for years with people involved in emergency, I know that people really care for children in emergency for what they see, but what they don't see is not a problem. So, and indicator 9 that we've seen, it tells us exactly what I am trying to explain. And we have the same issue with monitoring. In Italy, we have a very well-functioning system, surveillance system for children 0-2, and my colleague Enrica Pizzi, who's here today, is the person leading the surveillance system. And it's great because we have also at European level several indicators, not only infant feeding, but also other indicators that are important as health determinants in the first 1,000 days of life. But the emergency system we were not able in the last years to introduce such a simple system like separating, during the emergency, children by kind of feeding, type of feeding, exclusive breastfeeding, predominant, complementary or no breastfeeding, and group age, under 1 month, 2 to 6 months, and over 6 months, which is essential in emergency if you want to have a quick look of what are the needs, because we know that a non-breastfed baby has a huge need to be, of care, while a breastfed baby who's happily with the mother probably has less huge needs. And I finished my intervention. I was thinking, and thank you very much for all our speakers, because we had a lot of advocacy. Maybe now it's time for leadership. And I was thinking that also this opportunity of the WHO Collaborating Center and the strong collaboration and partnership with UNICEF and with the Ministry of Health and with the civil protection, maybe the time is ready, I hope, because we know everyone wants to do something, but maybe now we should focus more on these 2 or 3 things that we need. And maybe also the time is ready. I don't know, this is my impression now. Maybe Elise, you would like to add something?
No, I agree, Angela, and our speakers this morning have given us a really interesting perspective on different ways of approaching the problem. Everyone with the same outcome, making infant and young child feeding in emergencies a visible problem. They say if you don't count, you count what you care about. And if you don't count, if you don't do monitoring, if you don't do surveillance about things like infants with or without their parents. There are also those who've lost their parents. That's another category, again, that needs attention. But I think that is a real opportunity for us to do advocacy, as Alex was suggesting, to do monitoring, as Irena pointed out, and Jodine talked about as well. I think that opportunity, we'll hear this afternoon about experiences in Italy, both from Francesca Marchetti and from Giulia Bomben, about the first sort of attempts to work towards making this problem become more visible, so that it does become a priority. It does get on people's radar as a priority, and not just, oh, let's donate formula. That's the solution. That is the #1 solution that people offer who are not working in this area. When you say there's an emergency, the babies, the children, what should we do? Yes, donate clothes, maybe donate formula, maybe donate toys. Those are the big 3 priorities. And we have to somehow get that message that we're not being particularly cruel. We don't want to make babies starve. We want to protect the babies who have mothers who are breastfeeding, make sure that relationship continues, and then help the babies who need formula. Of course you need to do that, but you need to do it safely, and you need to do it in a way that ensures that there is minimal contamination, which we know is such a risk in these situations.
Thank you. Any question coming from the... No? Okay.
We have some comments that I can read. One is from Carleen Gribble, who's a researcher in Australia, saying that there are quite a few high-income countries that are now taking serious steps towards developing and implementing proper support for infants and young child feeding in Australia. So great that it's happening in Australia. You've made it visible. Yes, Irena, of course, Carleen is a very active member of this and undoubtedly was essential in bringing about this change. Let's see, anything else? Lots of thank yous, powerful messages. Okay, I don't see any new questions.
Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm sorry we cannot share our good Italian coffee with our international guests, but we are going to have a coffee here and hope you will have a nice coffee at home too. I suggest we keep as the coffee break will be outside because of the COVID procedures. We will be again here at 12:15. Is that okay? Ok, allora il coffee break è fuori all'aperto. Adesso vi facciamo vedere noi il modo per arrivarci perché non è immediatamente intuibile. E ci rivediamo qui a 12:15. Va bene? Ok.
We'll see you back here at 12:15. Thank you.